Okay, let's start the transition here to bring on Hannah Baker. And Hannah is at the ONA station, the Range Cattle Research and Education Center for IFAS. And Hannah is relatively new with University of Florida, and I believe she came from Oklahoma State, which I'll still allow her that because even though I'm from Iowa State, and well, we did beat Oklahoma State this year, so I don't have to apologize. But we don't normally do that. So glad to have another fellow Big 12 person in the group. And I will turn it over to Hannah, and she can tell you a little bit more about her education, and she'll talk to us about beef cattle and beef cattle economics. Take it away, Hannah.
All right. Well, thank you, Rod. Thanks for inviting me to come speak to you guys. Very excited to be a part of this. And like he said, I am new to IFAS. I started in the beginning of June and moved here from Oklahoma State, where I was getting my master's degree in ag economics out there. But I am originally from South Georgia, so I am glad to be back in the Southeast, closer to home and closer to what I know. But I did have a good time out there in Oklahoma State. Highly recommend it. But yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about just the beef cattle industry and the economics behind the beef cattle industry. And then Rod also asked me to talk a little bit about startup costs for a beef cattle operation. So I'm kind of hit on all of those aspects. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. Okay, I should be able to see that. Okay, so is starting a cow-calf operation in Florida economical? And so I just kind of want to preface this by saying this is not intended to like scare you or anything, scare you out of starting an operation or anything like that. This is just a realistic presentation about what the costs are like and what the beef industry is doing right now. So with that,
Hannah,
we'll just go, yeah.
if I could interrupt you just to say, don't
Okay.
hold back.
Okay.
Okay. They are used to me being their dream crushers. And I tell them I want to turn romance into reality because I want them to go into this with both eyes open. So please be honest and transparent about the challenges.
Okay, will do, will do. All right, so first, well, let's see. So go to the next slide. There we go. So I'm going to give you everybody's favorite answer, and that is it depends. Starting a cow-calf operation and even managing cows if you already have cows is different for everyone. It depends on what the market's doing, what input prices are like, how much land do you already have, how much do you need, depending on how big you want your operation to be and how big you need it to be. And then anybody can get cattle, I guess, if they really wanted to, but can everybody do it right? And so that's kind of what this presentation is focusing on is, yeah, we want to have cows. I, more than anybody, wish I had my own cow-calf operation, but I know for me, I would not be able to do it in the right way and have the means to do it right now. So that's kind of the things I'm going to touch on in this presentation. So I'm first going to talk about the cattle cycle and kind of what we're seeing right now. So if you know anything about the cattle industry or have heard people talking about it, you know that prices for feeder cattle are really good right now. They are up and we're in that kind of headed towards the peak of those prices. And cattle cycles typically last anywhere between 9 and 14 years, but they're typically right around that 10-year mark when they peak and then the cycle starts over. So what do I mean when I say a cycle and what I mean when I say it's starting and stopping and starting over and all of that? So you basically have points of lower prices and higher inventory, and then you have points of higher prices and lower inventory. And so that's our basic supply and demand curve, if you're familiar with that. So the current point in the cycle that we're at right now, our inventory is about 29.4 million, which is the lowest it's been since 2014. And before that, it was that low in the 1960s. And so that tells us right there that we can expect to see high prices because there's not a lot of supply of cattle. So the demand from feedlots and packers is high to try and keep their capacity up. So prices are going to be higher. And that's good for cattle producers. So we're towards that end of that cycle. And then when it ends, that's when expansion will begin and the beef cattle herd will start to start expanding. So this is just kind of a list of all the categories and current prices right now. You can see feeder steers, and I use this weight range right here because if you look at all the price reports, most cattle in Florida on average are going to be within this weight range. The next one would be the 500 to 545 weight range, but on average throughout the year, this is where most cattle in Florida end up selling at. And then you've got your heifers that are also doing well, bulls, breaker cows, so that's like your average cull cow, and then young bred cattle. This is interesting because prices for bred cattle right now are really good, but we can expect those to even start increasing in the coming years as producers start expanding. So what's going to happen is they're going to start retaining heifers, and producers are going to start thinking about rebuilding their own herds. So there's going to be a decrease in supply of female cattle, causing those prices to go up. So that's kind of what we can expect to see in terms of cattle prices over the next couple of years. So this is just a graph of the inventory levels with the prices. So the blue bars are inventory in July. So you can see we're at that low point, and then compared to 2014, it was really low. So you can see as inventory goes down, prices go up. And this orange line here is Florida cattle prices. I only have data back to 2017 is why it starts right there. But again, you can see we've been in this really low range here, about $1, what is that, $1.50 a pound. We were there for a while, but now that we're at this all-time low inventory level, we've seen prices skyrocket, and we can really expect them to keep rising because data shows that the market or that producers are not showing any indication of expanding right now. So, and then this is just another graph reiterating that same point. So this blue line here is the 5-year average of Florida feeder steer prices over the last 5 years. So you can see in the fall, we typically see a drop in prices because that's when most producers are selling those weaned calves that were born in the spring. But this year is different of this orange line here because of what I said, the inventory is low and so prices are higher. And so this is just comparing to our last time of expansion and when our inventory was really low, which was 2014 and 2015. And we can see from the gray and yellow lines, those prices went up and stayed up for a little while. So, and that's a big part of my job, is using these historical trends to kind of not predict, but to almost project what producers can expect to see. So I wanted to start out with that. So we're seeing prices are really good, but to be a Debbie Downer, we're also seeing input prices higher than they've ever been. So this number right here, a little over $1,000 per cow, and that's including pasture rent cost. And so we see that's as high as it's been since the late 1990s. And so that is also fighting against producers. We're seeing good cattle prices, but input prices and interest rates, feed costs, fertilizer costs have been really high due to inflation. And so now this is your estimated returns over cash costs. So you can see we're not in the red in 2023, but we're still not where we were in 2014, 2015. But like I said, because cattle prices are expected to keep rising over the next year, 2 years, we're going to hopefully see these cash returns increase. So that's good news, but there still are some challenges that cattle producers face every day, no matter what the market is doing. So now that we've got past that, can we talk about getting some cows? Not yet. First, we're going to talk about what you need for these cows, and that is land. So are you owning or leasing? Some of you may already have the land and the means to put up that fence and get cows, but some of you may be starting from the very bottom, starting from scratch. So these are just some prices I want to show you guys that are current right now in Florida. Pasture land rent prices are anywhere from $10 to $48 per acre, depending on where you're at in the state. And I just bolded this one for Sarasota because I know that's where Rod is. And so some of you may also be in that area. So it's $27 per acre currently in Sarasota. You may have seen land less than that, more than that, but that's the average in the data that I have. And then in South Florida, it averages about $21 per acre, which is 40% higher than 2022 and 75% higher than 10, 11 years ago. So like I said, cattle prices are good, but input prices and rent and interest rates are on the right, or were rising as well. So that's renting, but if you have your land payment, obviously you would know what your land payment would be. But the average value of pasture land in Florida this year is around $6,500 per acre. And again, the value has gone up, but also the rent has gone up. So, and our value has gone up, and people are moving to Florida every day. So we're having to raise cattle on less resources. So that's just one of those consequences or one of those circumstances that producers are having to fight against every day. So it's making it harder and harder for people like you and I to get into the cattle industry, especially here in Florida. So, and on this land, once you decide how much you need and what you're going to get and how much you're going to pay for it, what's the soil situation like on that land? So it's different in Florida. Most places are going to have that sandy soil. So get a soil test as soon as you can so that you know if you need to lime that soil so that your forages can thrive. Because if your soil, it all starts with the soil health and the forage health, and that forage can't thrive if that soil is not right. Soil tests are about $10, so it's very worth that investment to make sure you're starting on the right foot. And then how many cows can you have on X number of acres? So carrying capacity and stocking rate must be compatible. So what do I mean when I say carrying capacity? That is the amount of forage that is available on your place. So, and then stocking rate is how many animals you can put on that same amount of forage. So those two got to match. You can't have a really low carrying capacity and a high stocking rate. It's not going to work. You're going to overgraze and you're going to run out of forage and have very poor body condition score cows. And that triggers down into all of a bunch of different issues. So in Florida, depending on what your cows are grazing and what forage you have, your stocking rate can be anywhere between 1.5 acres to 25 acres per cow-calf pair. A really common forage in Florida is Bahia grass and Bermuda grass. And so for Bahia grass, if you're managing it correctly, you can do anywhere from 2 to 3 acres per cow or per cow-calf pair. And that takes some pretty intense management, but it's necessary management if you want to keep that kind of stocking rate. So still can't get cows. Now that we've talked about land, now we can talk about our input cost or our cash cost, which means we have paid money for this. This is not talking about any kind of accounts receivable or payable, that kind of thing. I'm just going to cover what you can pay for and receive in one exchange. So I'm first going to talk about your forage. So for this example and throughout this rest of this PowerPoint, this scenario is going to be 2 acres per cow, just so y'all know that with all my calculations. So are we establishing forage? Are we restoring forage on land we already have? What is the deal here? And so just from like pulling averages, literally I just Googled some seed cost and equipment and labor costs and kind of put an average together. It can range anywhere from $200 to $500 per acre, which translated for doing 2 acres per cow, $700 per cow. So that's looking at that. And that's really important. You got to start with that forage. You got to make sure it is established or you're going to be behind. Your forage management is vital. So places for feeding. Now there's a plethora of different options for feeding. You can do tubs that you built at your own shop. You can buy bunks. You can buy any type of thing you want to makeshift to feed your cattle in. So this one I just priced. If you wanted to do the concrete bunks, you can get them at Tractor Supply. And so breaking that down into a per head cost, average is about $100 per cow, because cows need about 2.5, 3 feet of bunk space per cow. So when you do the math there, and those concrete bunks come at about, I think, 8 feet. So if you do the math calculations, it averages about $100 per cow. And then access to water. So this cost right here is only the cost for the troughs, like if you're just buying troughs from Tractor Supply, but that doesn't account for if you've got to put in a water line. You got to make sure those cattle have water, and I know you all know that. So you would definitely have to make sure you have access to water, and so the cost to put in a water line would also be an additional cost. I just didn't include it in this PowerPoint. And then you've got to put fence up and your gates, and just pulling averages from that for just an electric fence, it'd be about $1,200 per cow. And every fence, I mean, that's really preference. I've seen a lot of people keeping cows with electric fence, but you can also, there are different options for that as well. So this is your total estimate per cow, so roughly around $2,000 per cow. And then if you add the land cost in that we just talked about at $27 per acre, so you got 2 acres per cow, that's $54 per cow. And then for a whole year, adding that to that cost. And then you got to work these cattle. So you're going to have to invest in a squeeze chute. And so your total cost for that would be around $1,000. And again, that's just an average cost of several options I looked at when I was preparing this presentation. Depending on how fancy you want to get, how technical, there's a lot of technology now with squeeze chutes, or if you just want to buy a basic head catch, that really just depends on your operation and your setup. So now maybe we can talk about getting cows that we've talked about all our input cost and but now we got to see, are we able to invest all of that money, and is it wise for you to start a cow herd right now and do it right? So I'm going to bring back to that point. We may be able to do it, but we don't want to just skate by the skin of our teeth to be doing it just to be doing it. We want to do it right so that we can really make this investment so that it turns around and is profitable for us. So I've come up with this little scenario. We're going to walk through the first 4 years of starting a cow-calf operation. And so let's say you're going to rent 20 acres and then you're going to buy 5 bred cows, which means she's pregnant at the sale barn, and then 5 pairs, which means she's already had that calf and it's buyer side when you sell it. And the reason we're going to do 5 pairs is my great granddad always told us that he always bought pairs that were bred so that you can sell that calf that she's already had to help pay for her. So I've kind of mixed that in there. So at the current cost of bred cows and pairs, this is what we're looking at here. So you're going to invest about $13,500 into those cattle to get them started. Then your land and input costs, I'm just pulling these from those previous slides. And I factor in that cost for that head catch, breaking that out, dividing that by 10 cows, so $100 per cow. So you do that and it ends up about $28,000 that you're investing. And then you got your feed, mineral, and medications for a whole year. This $200 right here will vary depending on your vaccination regimen and what you and your vet decide is best for your herd. So this again is just an average, but not far from what you may be spending on your cattle. So that's about $2,000 investing into 10 pairs. And so your total cost, you're a little over, or you're about $43,000, $530. And then when you sell those 10 calves, let's say you have 100% calving rate, which is really well. It's really great. So we're going to say you sell all those 10 calves in that 450 to 495 weight range, and you sell them for their current prices right now, and you're going to receive about 13,000. But I'm sure as all you can do math, you're at a loss right now of about 30,000. But I heard Rod talking about business plans earlier. This is not unusual. If you take a business plan to a bank and you're trying to get a loan, or you're talking with, I don't know, somebody, an extension agent or somebody from Farm Bureau, if you present your business plan and show that you're making money in your first year, they're gonna say you messed something up. They might even chuckle at you a little bit. It is unusual to see any business, whether you're in ag or anything, that you make money in your first year. So don't let this scare you. But it is realistic that you're going to be in the hole during that first year because you're having to invest in so much. So moving on to year 2. So this is going to be your same because you still got those 10 pairs. So we're just going to keep this same number. But now you've got to breed those cows. And so you've got to either invest in a bull or AI. So for this scenario, let's just say we're going to buy a bull because we've got the land to do it. So you're going to pay for him about $2,500, and then to maintain him, which accounts for feed, any medicine you need to give him, that sort of thing, we're going to round that out to about $3,000. And then you've got your land rent for that year and fertilizer. So we want to make sure again that our forages are where they need to be. You may not need to fertilize, but typically you're going to need to in those spring months. So we're going to put that about $700 per cow times 10 to be $7,000. So now our total cost is down quite a bit to 12,000 because we've already made this big investment cost. And then we sell those same amount of 10 calves. Let's say we're going to keep that same calving rate. And so this year we actually made a little bit of money in year 2. If you look back at it though, from your loss of year 1, you haven't made money, but you're getting there. You're starting to see the green. So let's say in year 3, we're feeling good. And so we've got the land to do it. We want to invest and kind of start expanding. So we buy 2 more, let's see, is that bred cows? Let's see, what did I say 1,500 was? Yep. So we're going to buy 2 more bred cows, young bred cows. And we're going to keep that same price. But like I said at the beginning of this PowerPoint, we're going to see those prices for female cattle go up. So that's really going to depend on what you are willing to invest and what you see where your operation is going. And then again, we're going to, now our cost for mineral and feed and medications has gone up a little bit because we've got 2 more pairs to take care of. Our breeding costs, so we bought that bull for $2,500, but he's still costing us something every year because he's depreciating. And so what that calculation for depreciation is, what you bought for him, how much you think you're going to sell him for, divided by his salvage value, which is the amount of years you expect to keep him in the herd. And so when you do that math, his depreciation and his cost per year is about $200. And then you've still got that annual maintenance fee. So when you're keeping your records and your budgets, you definitely don't want to ignore the depreciation because that is a cost. So that's about $700. And then again, we've got that land rent, gosh, my words tonight, land rent and fertilizer. So that's about $700. And then you got 12 cows. So now our grand total is 14.5. Now we've got 12 calves to sell. So our revenue increased a little bit to 15.6. And so now we've made $100 more than we did in year 2. And so now the last year that we're going to look at is year 4. And so again, we're going to stop at 12 because we've only got 20 acres. And with 12 pairs in our bull, we're pretty much at capacity with our stocking rate. So we're just going to, for this scenario, stay right there. So again, this cost is going to stay the same. Our bull cost is going to stay the same. Land rent and fertilizer is going to stay roughly the same for this scenario. So our total cost has now gone down to 11.5. And our revenue for 12 calves is 15.6 roughly. And then so your profit, you're seeing a significant increase from $1,000 to 4,100. So, but what is the verdict? So we've started to see in years 2, 3, and 4 that we made a little bit of money, but did we really make a little bit of money? So we invested, or our loss was 30 grand. We paid off about 6,200, but we are still in the hole from that year 1 investment, about $24,000. And if you do kind of the math, let's say you make this $4,100 consistently, throughout. It's going to take you about 6 years to recover from year 1. But I have this little statement in here of all else remaining constant. But that's hilarious because the cattle industry is anything but constant. As I talked about in the beginning, the market is changing. So in our input costs, those are always changing from year to year. So obviously these estimates will vary from operation to operation and year to year. But this is really just a basic and average numbers to show y'all that it's not just about going to the sale barn and loading up some cows. You've really got to make sure your business plan is what you want and what you can do economically. So yeah, just is this something you can afford to do at all? If yes, is this something you should invest in now or later? And this is kind of where you would call me and we would talk through it, or call one of your county extension agents like Rod, or whichever county that you're in. And we would kind of talk through what the market is doing right now and see maybe if you could start slow, like maybe let's get the land now, let's get the fence now. And then maybe when female prices start to go down, that's when we could maybe invest in building the herd. So that's really going to be from a person to person, operation to operation basis. So now I'm going to just kind of wrap this up with talking about cattle production in Florida and in the Southeast. So here in Florida, we have a very unique environment with the heat, humidity, being here down at the beach where everybody wants to retire and live. So we've got more people moving here every day, taking up our land and our resources. And we also have unique cattle to adapt to that unique environment of it being hot and different kind of parasites. So we have that Brahman influence. But because of that, we receive lower prices because Brahman influence takes away, not really takes away, but it influences the way that carcass is finished out at a feed yard. And we're also far away from feedlots. So all of our feedlots are based, big ones where cattle are finished out at, are located out west, like Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, or your big feed states in Texas. And a lot of Florida cattle will end up being in Texas because Texas also uses that Brahman influence because of the heat and the parasites that they deal with. But that transport costs a lot. And so over the last 6 years, and that's just the data that I have, Florida has received about 16% lower prices than feeder cattle out west. So that's just one of those circumstances that cattle producers in Florida have to deal with and make sure they're compensating for. And the way we compensate for that is through management practices. So we want to capitalize on the market through management strategies, no matter what the market is doing. So right now, producers are loving the market because feeder cattle prices are higher and they're very favorable. But what about when those prices eventually come down? Because what goes up must come down eventually. And so what are we going to do to keep taking advantage of favorable prices when the market is not giving us those prices? So we can do things like value-added programs, controlled breeding seasons, supplementation programs, et cetera, et cetera. So when I say value-added programs, some sale barns offer the opportunity to have a separate sale when you're enrolled in a, let's say, vaccination or preconditioning program. And data shows that you receive a premium for those cattle. Feedlots will pay a little bit more because if they know your cattle are enrolled in a vaccination program and have been exposed to bunk feeding, they'll pay a little bit more because your cattle are less likely to get sick in the feed yard, and they will finish out better. So those are just some things that you can look into. And it doesn't even have to be a program you enroll in. You can take your cattle at any sale barn and tell the auctioneer or tell the owner of that sale barn, hey, this is my cattle's regimen. Please let the feedlot buyers know this, and I promise it will help. Data shows that it does. And then the controlled breeding season. So what I say by that is keeping your bull in year round is not recommended by me. And if you talk to any extension professional, they're going to tell you to please control your breeding season. And so what we mean by that is you're either going to have a 60, 90 day, 120 day breeding season where you're keeping that bull in for a set amount of days and then pulling him out so that all of your calves are going to be born roughly at the same time or in a time period that is controlled. And we want that because then all of our calves will be more uniform and we can receive a better price because, again, feed yards are looking to fill their trucks. And so a truckload is about 50,000 pounds. And so if a feed yard can buy a lot of cattle at a sale barn that are roughly the same and can fill that load more efficiently, they're willing to pay a little bit more than that than having to buy cattle that are at different weights from different lots. That's more work for them. So if all of your cattle are around the same weight and are raised the same and look uniform, feedlots will pay a little bit more for that. And also having a controlled breeding season means you've got more calves born earlier in your calving season. And so they may weigh a little bit more. So that's also going to increase your net revenue. And then I just want to touch on supplementation programs. So like I said about the forage management, it all starts there. But as we know, during this cool season like we're in right now, our warm perennial season grasses like Bahia grass, they're starting to go dormant, and so that nutritive value is going down. And so we really want to make sure that our supplementation programs are accurate. And so when I say accurate, I want to make sure everybody understands that cows especially, their nutrition requirements vary throughout the year depending on what stage that they are in, whether they're in their first trimester, they're in their third trimester, or they're in their lactation phase where they're feeding that calf, and that's when their nutritional value is going to be at their highest. And in Florida, a lot of operations calve in the fall. So that's when we would need to supplement our cows because that forage nutritive value goes down. So we need to make sure we're giving our cows what they need so they can feed that calf, because a healthy cow means you have a healthy and heavy calf to sell at the sale barn. So, and then just reiterating again, forage management is where it all starts. So you've got to make sure that you're managing your forage correctly, or you're going to feel like you're behind until you get that managed correctly. So I think, yep. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions that you may have or just comments. I feel like I maybe kind of breezed through that. So please, if you have any questions, I am all ears.
And before while everyone else thinks of some questions here. So you mentioned value-added programs, and you talked about some things like supplementation and vaccination programs and that. But others talk about value-added, meaning from the marketing aspect. So is it organic? Is it grass-fed? And that tends to people tend to gravitate towards that, at least beginning farmers, smaller farmers, because they think that that value added is where there are higher margins. But Florida presents a whole set of challenges for those types of value added markets, organic and specifically grass fed. Can you talk a little bit more about why those are so challenging to do here?
Yeah, so first, I want to clarify for everybody, grass-fed, all cattle are grass-fed. They are on grass for the majority of their lives, but you have grass finished and you have grain finished. So that grass finished, and this is not, I mean, this is for US producers, but also consumers. It's our job to let them know that there's
Hannah, you've been muted here, so if you can unmute, there you go.
Okay, so I don't know where I cut out at, but
We were just talking about grass finished versus green finished.
yeah, so all cattle are grass fed, but some are grass finished and some are grain finished. So for grass finished cattle, it takes a lot longer to finish those cattle. And so for Florida, it's hard to do that because of our forage capacity and the limited land and resources that we have. And it's very expensive to do. But it is a marketing tactic. Consumers seem to definitely gravitate towards the grass finished rather than grain finished. But data shows and research shows there's no difference between nutritive value in those cattle. Grain finished cattle actually have more marbling. So, but yeah, if that's something that you want to do, I'm definitely not talking down on it. I think it's great if you can do that. It's just very hard to do in Florida because of our limited resources, and it's very expensive to do.
Also, when people think of the cattle business, that's the sexy part, right? The cows, and they think they want to be ranchers. And you hit on this correctly, so that what you are as a grass farmer, that forage management will be as much a determinant of your success as your cattle.
Right.
Could you say a little bit more about how that is, so why that is so important?
Yeah, so like I said, cattle are on grass for most of their lives, and then your cows in your herd will be on grass from the day that you get them till the day that you cull them out of your herd. I mean, that's besides any supplement that you give them, they are surviving off of forage. And cows are unique that they can take that forage and turn it into beef. And so okay. So they're designed to turn that grass into beef. Where was I going with that? Yeah, so if you overgraze your forage, it's very hard to get back to where you need to be. Yeah, so if they're not grazing the forage, their first priority is gonna be to survive, and then second to help their calf survive. So if you have less forage, you're gonna have lower body condition score cows, which means they're unhealthy. And then so they're not able to give as much to their calf, which translates into lighter weight calves. And that even affects pregnancy rates. So when you go to rebreed those cattle, they're not going to breed back as fast or as well. So then you've got a bunch of open cows you're either having to feed or going to have to cull out of your herd. So it just all goes back to that forage and fertilize and make sure it's at the right nutritive value, making sure your stocking rates are good. Yeah. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
The point I was kind of leading to is that the last thing you want to do is purchase your forage or purchase your feed. That will extend that break-even point from 7 years to 10 years or maybe never.
Yes.
So what you want to do is grow your own forage, and that is really a key to success.
Yes, and to touch on that, you're either going to have to pay, going back to that fertilizer cost, you're either going to invest in fertilizing or you're going to have to invest in a supplement and a lot more hay. So either way, you're having to spend money, but typically it's going to be cheaper to fertilize and keep your forage where it's at than to have to try and compensate. And that's just more work and hassle for you to try to figure out how much hay you need and that sort of thing. So getting a fertilizer regimen down and really knowing your forage, working with your extension agents and that sort of thing can save you money. So yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Other questions?
Everybody, I have a question.
Mhm.
Hi, Anna. First of all, thanks for the case study. I appreciate you pulling all those numbers together. That was really, really interesting.
Yeah, no problem.
I was wondering about like kind of like the regulatory environment, and if you see, are there any sort of new regulations or anything you see on the horizon that could be sort of complicated or problematic for like a new rancher? Or
I don't know. I mean, there is the new medication law that just went in this summer about you can't just go and buy your local antibiotic at your local feed store. You do have to go through a vet to do that. So it's very important to establish a vet-client relationship with a vet so that your vet knows your herd, so that when you do need medications, that vet has no question about how you treat your animals, and so you can get that medication quickly. So that is a new regulation I am aware of. Rod may know a little bit more for
Well,
Florida specific since I'm new, but
have you heard anything about like specifically like carbon reduction or like any of that stuff we're kind of seeing in like some of the other countries that's going on?
Yeah, so again, I'm not aware of any regulations off the top of my head, but there is a lot of research going on about how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions through our cattle operations and sequester more carbon in our soil. So I do know there's a lot of research going on, but I'm not sure if there are any. I don't know of any specific regulations. Rod may know a little bit more about that.
I don't know of any cap and trade type things
Yeah.
where they're going to penalize people for carbon emissions, but certainly the market is kind of being pushed that way, and cattle are not being thought of or promoted favorably when it comes to greenhouse gases. So there is some negative pressure on the market, but I don't know of any regulations, so to speak, that are coming. But there is what Hannah said about the medications. There's the veterinary feed directive, which says you've got to keep very good records and justify any use of antibiotics and any kind of medications like that. So record keeping is becoming a much more of a challenge for ranchers, just like it is for almost any farmers or any industry. So record keeping is becoming a little bit of a hindrance.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Ryan, you had a question? We can't hear you, Ryan. Still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was trying to use my kid's PlayStation headset. So you were mentioning about the Brahma, I guess, influenced cattle. I drove through Ocala just a little while ago, and they have a bunch of Angus bulls for sale. Does the Angus change much from what that is? Do they require more forage, or they added cost and just upkeep, or do they provide a bigger prize at the end, I guess?
So you're asking if Angus cattle provide a bigger prize? Is that your question? Yes.
Do Angus cows sort of, are they a hindrance compared to your Brahma influenced? Are they a plus? I'm not that I'm getting into this, but my mind just wanders. And
oh yeah,
do Angus provide a better medium, I guess? I don't know what you would call it.
Yeah, so Angus cattle are yes, you more than like most people incorporate some sort of Angus into their herd because the black hide is very, very wanted at the sale barns and in feedlots, because Angus are known, that breed is known for their marbling and their carcasses. They feed out really well in feedlots. They're also known for great maternal traits. They're great mothers. They have low birth weights. So calving ease is a plus. You don't have to you do have to check your cows, but they don't have usually any problems with calving out. So Angus is definitely a favorite breed among cattle producers all over the country. And you're definitely going to receive a premium at the sale barn if you've got some Angus influence in there, especially if they've got a black hide. So Angus is, I am personally love Angus cattle. They're probably my favorite. So yeah, the Brahman influence is where that price deduction comes in, because one, Brahman cattle, it takes longer for them to reach maturity. So you're investing a little bit more in them. Their carcass weights, they finish out differently. They're just different sides of the spectrum. So, but yes, Angus cattle are great. They're great.
And
My
Ryan, what
father-in-law has
normally,
the,
go ahead, Ryan.
Herefords, or
What was that?
the Herefords or Haverford,
Hereford,
Hereford. Yeah, there you go.
yeah.
Yeah, Herefords are great too. They're known for their resiliency, like in the Midwest. They're very popular in the Midwest because they're great on the range and native range forages, and they also have good maternal traits, and they're a little bit bigger cattle, so their carcasses are typically a little heavier. So that you see a lot of that mixed in with that Brahman cattle as well. See a lot of Brayford mixes. Yeah, any sort of composite F1 breed where you're taking one purebred, mixing it with another purebred, and getting that F1, you're going to see a lot more benefits come out of those cattle than you will see from purebred cattle. So that's why you see a lot of mixes going on.
And in Florida, they tend to gravitate plus or minus to about a 3/8 Brahman
Mhm.
and 5/8 Angus, and they call it a Brangus, or a
Yeah.
5/8 Hereford, and they'll call it a Brayford. And there's
Mhm.
various other composite breeds, as Hannah mentioned too. But they try to get them to look like an Angus, but they have some of the heat tolerance traits and the parasite resistance of the Brahman. So there's been 30, 40, 50 years of cow breeding that's gone on to get to some of these composite breeds. And they really work well in Florida.
Yes.
Is there a cow that is able to handle the heat better than maybe the Brahma influence? I mean, like we were talking about cows that are able to sweat or whatever. The cows that are able to handle the heat better in Florida because of their perspiration or whatever, or respirations or whatever.
Right. There are some tropical breeds. And I'm working with a guy now here in Sarasota who wants to do the Watusi or something like that, which, yes, they've come from a tropical area. They have that adaptation. They're going to work well in Florida. But back to Hannah's point, they won't have the carcass traits. They won't have the daily gain potential, the feed conversion. So there's going to need a breeding process. If you're going to take them into the conventional market, buyers are going to go, I don't want that cow because I don't know how it's going to grade out. I don't know how it's going to work. So anytime you want to get off that beaten path, there may be an opportunity there, but there's also going to require some education and some patience to educate the consumer, and in this case, being the feedlot buyer, that your animal is going to work for them. So that's why they go 3/8 Brahman and 5/8 one of these other more conventional breeds, because it's still somewhat what fits their pattern and their needs, but it combines the tropical traits that we need here. So yes, there are other breeds, but they're going to be farther away from that end of mark that you need to get to be profitable. That's what I'm trying to say. Anything else on that, Hannah?
Yeah,
No, that was good. I agree with all that.
Ed, go ahead.
yeah. Well, this comment, because with the Brangus, they stand up better to the heat than the Angus, but then so you have the Brangus cattle, and there's talk about introducing, I guess, the white cattle, which I guess maybe they're called Chalet, and breeding Chalet bulls to work well in Florida because they're standing up better to the heat. Is that true, and is that becoming popular, or there's an awful lot of ads in different magazines with words like that?
So Charlet, if I heard you right, so a lot of people incorporate Charlets in the southeast because Charlets have a finish great. They have a great carcass score and great carcass weight. So you have a lot of producers using Charlet if they are retaining ownership of those cattle after they sell them into the feed yard. and when I say retain, they're keeping ownership of those cattle until they go off to slaughter. And so Charolais are incorporated more for a terminal market if you're wanting to see and receive a better price when those cattle go to slaughter. So that's a big, and that's producers in the Southeast use that to try and gain, like I said, try to take advantage of market premiums because we are receiving a little bit of a lower price because we're so far away from the Midwest. So that's where you see a lot of that Charolais come in. But as far as Charolais combating against the heat, I'm not sure that I'm aware of Charolais being able to combat the heat as well as the Brahman breed. I have not heard that. It could be true, but I'm not aware of that.
I agree with Hannah. I've not heard that either. And Charolais is a continental European breed, so the chances are it doesn't have as good a heat tolerance as Brahman. Whereas Hereford, Angus are more the English breeds, but anything that's kind of has a European origin is not going to tolerate the heat well, unless it's gone through a number of breeding cycles already in Texas or Florida or South Georgia. I mean, there's always that caveat that if people have used the genetic diversity within Angus, maybe they've selected a section of Angus that perform better in the heat, but they're probably still not as well as going to do as well as Brahman.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Ed. Last question.
If you have a couple dozen heifers that you want to get pregnant and you have a bull that you release on them for 30 days or 60 days or some number, then the assumption is that that's enough time that all of the heifers get impregnated, and in reality, supposedly only a number like 80% really do, because for some other reason it doesn't pass. Is that a factor in the plans of raising calves, or what do you need to know about that?
Yes, yeah, and typically for heifers, it's recommended to leave that bull in, put the bull in earlier with the heifers than you do the cows, because those heifers are not at their 100% mature weight. They're typically going to be, you want them to be 60 to 65% of their mature weight when you start breeding them, but they are young cattle and it's their first breeding, so it's recommended to put the bulls in with them for a little bit longer time to give them more times to cycle so that they can get pregnant. But yeah, your preg rate, it is very rare, especially on large operations, to see 100% preg rate. You typically see anywhere between, depending on their management style, anywhere 75 to 90, 95. So 100% is rare, but for a small operation, if you're managing your cattle and are involved and have got a good bull and have got good heifers, 100% is not impossible to do. But you're right, there are factors that go in. Sometimes those heifers won't get bred, and then that's when they need to be culled out. So.
Thank you, Hannah. We're going to need to stop it there. So we appreciate your coming and sharing a real world experience with us. Thanks for that scenario. That really helped tell the story. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And then I sent Rod just a short survey that he's going to email to y'all at the end of this. It's only 6 questions, so if you could just please take it, it would really help me a lot in improving my programs and presentations like this. So thank y'all for having me.
I will send that out.
Before you take off,
Ryan, I'm going to let everybody else go to break first,
okay,
and then you can ask Hannah if she can stay a few more minutes. So we're going to take a break now. We'll be back at let's say 7:48. How about that? 7:48 is when we're going to come back. So we're going to take a break. But if you want to stick around, we'll have a little bit more discussion here. But 7:48, we'll be back. Go ahead, Ryan.
I just had a question. I was looking into buying some acreage a couple of years ago, and it kind of fell through because it was like the wetlands were all over the land. But when you're talking about leasing land, how does the topography, or like saying whether there's wetlands on the land or whether it's firm earth, is the wetlands preferred, or is that just because it's cheaper land they choose that?
The wetlands will usually, I'm gonna assume this will probably be cheaper because they're harder to develop, and so they're not desirable by developers. That's usually why you see, and pasture land in general is gonna be cheaper. So yeah, but yeah, wetlands are probably be a little bit cheaper because they're flooded usually, and it's harder to
Right.
grow forage and harder to develop on those.
Does
So
wetlands matter, like with the health of the, say, the ankles of the cows and whatnot,
of
and
the cows.
tendons?
I don't know about that, but yeah, I mean, it would definitely be a factor to consider to make sure it's a safe environment and for your fences too. I mean, if it's flooded, maybe hard to get a fence in there, maybe hard for you to get in there to check cows. So
Right.
those are just definitely things you wanna consider.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Thank y'all for having me.